If the clock is right, it is 6 o'clock, and we need to get started on time because we want to be respectful and get you out of here by 7:30 as advertised. So welcome again to the, I don't know, at least 5th annual community budget meeting. And thank you for those of you who came. We invited about 90 people to this event, and obviously you're the ones who showed up, so we're really glad that you were able to come out and be a part of this tonight. Our agenda this evening, we'll be doing a lot of background tonight, just helping you understand what the financial situation is that we're going into this year in preparation of discussion and decisions to come. Although we'll try to not make it all sit and get this evening, we'll try to give you an opportunity to also ask questions and talk to each other. The agenda tonight is really to review the Budget Committee goals and purpose, give you a bit of a legislative update on some of the pieces of legislation that are out there and alive and well, and what those might mean as far as impacts to the district. Talk about potential impacts to the budget based upon what may or may not happen with future legislation and how they respond to the Supreme Court ruling, and how we're going to balance reductions that we might need to make with revenue increases that we might need to make. And then we'll also, we might have an opportunity to get into budget work groups tonight, or we might not. It just depends on how many questions you have and how we move along through the evening. So that's the agenda. I'd like to remind you of our objectives of the process with the Community Budget Committee. Our objectives are these: to increase the community's and staff's involvement in the budget process, to give you a chance to ask questions, share ideas, and have some ownership in the process, and to create that community ownership of the budget issues and decisions that are made, so that it's not just Lori and I making them and giving that recommendation to the board, but really giving everybody an opportunity to have some skin in the game and tell what you think and make suggestions, and to develop a budget that best supports the district's strategic and operational plan. And so if you remember our strategic plan, our mission is that all students graduate with the knowledge, skills, and behaviors to be college and career ready. And we have two main focuses, strategic actions and activities that we are doing toward that end, and that is teach literacy across the curriculum, with literacy encompassing English language arts, reading and writing, and communication skills, as well as financial, or not financial, mathematical literacy. And then to teach, model, and reinforce positive behaviors, so that work that we're doing to improve the climate of the schools and student behavior so that they can really focus on learning. And then we have, as goals that we are measuring, academic outcomes of progress and how kids are doing in their core subject areas, as well as a variety of soft skills that will be useful for students in their future employment. So we want to come up with a budget that will support that the very best that we can. So those are the objectives that this committee has. And the purpose is to provide input to administration and the Board of Education in the form of budget recommendations. So ultimately, when we get through this period of time that we will meet together, we will have recommendations. And those recommendations will be refined by administration and then recommended to the Board of Education once more specific budget numbers are available. Might be May, June, who knows, it could even be July of this year.
I almost put July.
It could be July this year. But so want to make it very clear that you're giving input and helping us form those recommendations that we're going to make. But ultimately, it is our Board of Education that makes those decisions. I do want to recognize we have Randall Gray here this evening with the Board of Education, and also Rudy Rodriguez. So thank you both for attending on behalf of the board. I want to give you a bit of background about the Supreme Court ruling, and then I'll give you an opportunity to ask any questions that you might have about that. As you may be aware, we are now into the 5th year of litigation with the state, and we have a ruling that came out not too long ago, and the Supreme Court once again said, on the matter of equity, you're not equitable. That basically, the new block grant system that was put in place this year does not meet constitutional muster. And the last time the Supreme Court ruled on this, they said you have to have fairly equal educational opportunity from similar tax effort. In other words, the amount of local taxes that we're able to raise to support education per student has to be pretty similar to what you get anywhere in the state. Your zip code should not determine the quality of education that a community can afford to pay for. So the Supreme Court said, no, this new block grant doesn't get it. You've got to fix that. And you have until June the 30th to fix it. So what does that mean? Well, they basically said that the equity piece has to do with our capital outlay, because they changed the amount of aid that they give us, and they also said if you raise any additional capital outlay millage after last school year, you don't get any equalization. So we raise some capital outlay going forward here, we get nothing. We get no new aid. Whereas district that maybe already had 8 mills, they're getting that aid on all 8 mills, but because we were good stewards and had not levied that yet, we don't get any aid to go with it. Also with the local option budget, same thing. If you raise your local option budget higher, you're not getting the additional aid that goes along with that you should. So our district has been, caught on both of those areas. And so what does that mean? Well, it means that we've really been shorted in capital outlay about $120,000 worth of aid. And in our local option budget, we've been shorted about $500,000, and that comes right out of the taxpayer's pocket. So the $120,000, the schools just didn't get it. That's $120,000 worth of technology or roof repairs that we can't buy because we don't have the money. The local option budget aid means the schools did still get the money, but we got it from our good taxpayers. So your taxes were $500,000 higher due to that. So essentially, the court has said this really does not fix the problem. The block grant is unconstitutional. It doesn't pass the equity test of similar dollars raised for similar taxation. And it says, you have these choices. So the courts have said to the legislators, you have these choices. The choices are these. Go back to the old formula that was based on enrollment. The cost to do that to the state would be about $54 million, which if you've been following the state revenue, the state doesn't have. Or come up with something new. But if they come up with something new, it has to pass the equity test. The equity test as it has been established in the last court ruling that says you have to, for similar mill levy, you get similar dollars across the districts. Now the problem is they can't do that without putting substantial money into the system. There may be some legislators that think they can, but if they think that, they obviously don't understand things. Because the graph of the amount of money raised per mill levy kind of looks like this. You have, about 40 or 50 districts that there's this ramp up, and they really are hurting. And then it kind of goes wavy line like this. It used to go nice, kind of a nice flat spot for a while. Now it kind of goes up and down crazy. And then it goes way up. And these districts right over here in this part of the graph, they're not getting any equalization aid. Well, in order for a new formula to be equitable under the standard that the court established, everybody has to be at the same level, so that line has to be flat. So they either have to cut all the really affluent districts and say, okay, you can raise that levy, but we'll take some of that money and share it with the other schools. They won't like that. Or you have to put a ton of money in the system to bring the lowest funded districts to be able to raise that same amount of money as those districts that aren't getting any aid. So to come up with something new that will pass constitutional muster will take a ton of money, probably several $100 million that the state doesn't have. The other option that they have would be disastrous to all schools. And that is if they just said, well, in that case, there is no more local option budget and there is no more capital outlay mill levy. You just can't raise that money. All you get is your general fund money. That is another way that they could fix the problem. That would be frightening because the local option budget, as you know, ours is at 30%, but really because of some strange ways we get to calculate the formula, it's really closer to about 33% of our budget, and then the capital outlay is additional money on top of that. So you would be talking millions of dollars that would go away because our supplemental general fund money is about $10 million.
And our capital outlay, we levy 4 mills, and a mill is worth $211.
Yeah, so it's, call it $1 million. So we're talking $11 million in our district that would just disappear overnight if that was the way they chose to fix the formula. And that would happen in school districts across the state. Obviously, that would be a colossal train wreck. I don't believe our legislators would do that because their constituents, the public outcry would be just tremendous. I mean, I don't think schools could operate in the state if they did that. So I really think the only true answer that the state can afford is going back to the old formula, at least the part of the formula, the way it was calculated, related to the local option budget and related to capital outlay. Now that's a whole lot of information that I just threw at you. So I'd like for you to just take a minute and chat with a neighbor about what in the world did that mean, and if you have any questions, just take a minute and talk to your neighbors about what questions do you have, and then if you have any questions after about a minute of conversation, I'll try to answer those for you with Lori's help. So take a minute, talk to your neighbors. What about this makes sense, doesn't make sense? What do you want to know more about? All right, moving on. So what would happen if we get to June the 30th and the court has ordered the legislators to fix this unconstitutional problem and they don't? Or they think they fixed it and the court says, no, you didn't. Well, here's what could happen. I will predict, and take my prediction for whatever you think it's worth, but I would guess that our legislators will take potentially right up until June the 30th to decide that they have found a solution for the problem and they'll pass some new law. Now, if the law that they pass simply says, we found $54 million, we know that that's constitutional because the court said they'll let that be our safe harbor, and we'll just take that part of the formula, we'll let the rest of the block grant stand, but we'll put the LOB and capital outlay back the way it was. Here's your money. No problem. Life goes on. But if they do nothing, or if they try to pass a new law, which, like I said, unless they put a ton of money in it, it won't be constitutional. Then what happens on July 1 is this. The courts will not immediately be able to say, oh, good job, unless they go back to the old formula. So they will have to take a few weeks to look at this. So most likely they wouldn't have a shutdown of schools on July 1. It would probably hit more like July the 15th or that week right after that. Give the courts a couple of weeks to take a look at it. So if the courts say no, then what happens? Well, the way the court can enforce their ruling is basically this. They say, we have the power to keep unconstitutional laws from being put into effect. So essentially, you can do nothing under the current block grant formula. That means it is illegal for the state to disperse any money to schools, and it is illegal for us to spend any money. Well, if we can write no checks and we can incur no expenses, then essentially what happens is schools just shut down. Now you may say, well, that's July, no problem, because schools aren't in session. However, there's a whole lot of other stuff going on behind the scenes, because it means there's nobody in the business office, so we can't write checks, we can't use our credit cards, we'll have to shut those all down, so nothing can be purchased around the district. Any travel and training the staff would normally do during the summer, that would all stop. The summer maintenance work that is generally done, that would all stop. The people who monitor our technology systems and do summer updates and those kinds of things, that work would all stop. Those people would have to go home. Hopefully they would let critical people like Bob Williams, who monitors, if a pipe breaks and water starts flooding the building, hopefully they would let someone like that be on duty to be checking the buildings and go, oh goodness, there's water here, we need to fix that. But essentially, nobody gets a paycheck, so if this happens on July the 13th, our employees don't get paid. And we disperse money, equally to our people through the year. The teachers that, don't choose to be paid all their money when they earn it, and they actually get some paychecks then through the summer, they won't get paid. Our year-round employees, they don't come to work, they won't get paid. It means the bills won't get paid. So if a vendor is working, brought us something, sends us a bill, there's nobody here to get the mail. So there can't be deliveries, there can't be summer maintenance. Summer school, we have kids that have IEPs that say that they do get summer school for their special needs. That can't happen. There won't be board meetings. We can't work on enrollment. Nothing. So everything comes to a grinding halt. Also, there wouldn't be any use of our facilities because we can't open the facilities to the public because there's nobody here to unlock the doors, turn the lights on, clean up after them, make sure they didn't vandalize the place or cause any damage while they were here. So that means no summer camps, any other organizations that have signed up to use the facilities. That would all come to a grinding halt, which would likely mean we couldn't start school on time. It would mean that we would have to push the start of school however many weeks back into August or even September to be able to then have time to get any critical summer maintenance done, to get enrollment done, any training that teachers have to have on the new curriculum and things and materials. It just is going to be a big mess. But we're working on a plan for how we would do that if it happens. But it certainly wouldn't be pleasant and it won't be easy. But my greatest fear is that legislators and the community thinks, oh well, if schools are shut down during July, that doesn't matter because there aren't kids in school. But it will have a big impact on people in the community. It will have a big impact on parents and students because if we have things that we can't do at the critical time we need to be doing them, like enrollment, and schools are shut down, there's no way to speed up that process. We'll just have to push the start of school back. Any questions that you might have about that? Okay, seeing none, I'll move on. New legislation that is out there. How did I somehow get, there we go, jumped ahead. There are some new pieces of legislation out there, and right now they have proposed no legislation on how they're going to fix the Supreme Court ruling. So they're coming up with other interesting pieces of legislation, but just some things to be aware of and watch. There's a piece of legislation out there for state aid for capital improvements. That doesn't impact our current bond issue. That continues to be paid, but any new schools wanting to pass bond issues, basically they're saying that there would be a planning committee at the state level that would have to review your plan and approve whether you could do a bond issue or not. They would look at how much of it was for educational purposes, and if it wasn't for an educational purpose, then that part of it wouldn't be paid for. Now there might be some sense to this. However, what we're hearing right now is bathroom, that's not educational. Hallway, that's not educational. Kitchen, that's not educational. So that they're taking areas of the school project and saying, no, that wouldn't be educational, that wouldn't be educational, that wouldn't be educational, and really whittling down what they would pay for, not to mention that if they didn't like it, they would just say, no, we're not going to fund that. So there would only be a percentage of the project that would get approved by the board, by the State Board of Education, or probably some legislative committee, which is even a little more worrisome, if this one would pass. So be watching for that. It really won't impact us because I don't foresee us doing any bond issues in the immediate future. But if it passes and it's still around, 20 years from now, then, definitely it would have an impact on us. Here's another bill, House Bill 2457, just to be aware of. It is aid to non-public education, and basically what it does is provide a tax credit for people who want to provide scholarships for kids to attend private schools. And it basically opens that up so that just about any kid could get a scholarship to attend a private school. You don't have to be a new kid attending the private school. There doesn't have to be anything wrong with the public school that you're attending. It just opens that up. It could go to homeschoolers. You could call that your private school. And I talked to some people the other day who said, "Oh, I think that's a great idea. I don't see anything wrong with that. That doesn't hurt public schools at all." And I said, "Well, a tax credit means that, so instead of me paying my taxes in, which, and they're saying there are millions of dollars now that can go to this. Well, those millions of dollars used to come into the state revenue source and could have been used to fund public school or something else. But instead, they'll be funding private schools. So in a roundabout way, that is absolutely state money funding private schools. And once you fund one private school, you can fund any private school. There are some private schools that, I personally would probably say, well, that's my religious denomination. I like that school. That's a good school. Oh, wait a minute. Here's a private school that doesn't have anything to do with, what I believe. This is a different religion entirely, and it's not part of my faith. And wait a minute, now, how come they can do this? So there begin to be those kinds of issues. With the homeschool issues, you begin to see, problems like, if you've been following the awful situation with the couple not too far from here that's been homeschooling their children and abusing them. I don't think we'd want to see that kind of thing being allowed to happen, where you can collect money from the state to homeschool your children, and really what's happening is you're out of the public eye, and something bad might be happening to kids. So there's a lot to watch with this. The bill has an automatic increase, so it starts out at $10 million can go to these tax credits, but by the year 2026, the amount of tax credits that could be funneled off to private education is $116 million. So pretty concerning just over the course of time what that bill is designed to do, and the amount of money that it's designed to take away from public education to begin to steer kids into private education. And what I think will happen then is private schools don't necessarily want to deal with all the challenges that public education has, so they'll just raise their tuition higher. So it won't be that this kid can afford to go because now they have this tax credit. It'll be, well, you have that tax credit, but we'll just raise the tuition any higher, to price you out. So I really see a lot of issues there that I just think we need to think through as a state, because I think it has some pretty bad implications. The anti-Common Core bill is back again, which essentially declares that after July the 1st, 2017, any actions taken by an education entity or state official to adopt, implement, or align programs, assessments, testing, surveys, or any other material that align with the Common Core standards would be void. So in other words, you can't do anything, assessments, no testing, you can't use any educational materials that align to Common Core. Okay, the problem with that is, number one, everything we have now aligns with Common Core, so do we throw all that out? It would cost millions of dollars to replace it. This is also the bill that essentially nullifies the ability for schools to have advanced placement and international baccalaureate programs. Why? Because those programs, the testing that's required nationally and internationally align to Common Core standards. And the training that the teachers have to go to for International Baccalaureate aligns to that. And it's funny because I've heard from some of the legislators, oh no, that wouldn't keep you from doing those things at all. Well, it says right there in the law that they've written, you can't spend money or give any tests that have this sort of alignment. And the answer that I've been given is, well, we'll have a year for International Baccalaureate and AP to align to whatever the new Kansas standards are. But they are not going to jump through the Kansas hoops. They'll say, thank you, we're going to keep doing what we're doing. We're national and international organizations. Kansas, we're really sorry your kids won't have that opportunity anymore. So that's another really interesting piece of legislation to keep an eye on if that sees the light of day. And then last but not least, in the things to keep an eye on would be the efficiency report, and that is Lori's to get to talk about. And you just know it's Lori's when you see all those numbers on it. So we'll let Lori talk a little about the efficiency report.
I couldn't let y'all down and not give you this huge spreadsheet to look at. Basically, what I wanted to discuss with you tonight is across the news, everyone is talking about school districts and their cash balances. So I wanted to explain to you a little bit about what are our cash balances and why do we use them. So to start with, I want to give you a little rundown of what the spreadsheet says to you. See this column right here? See my dot? That is actually book balance on June 30th, 2015, or bank balance, excuse me. That is what we had in our banks. This column right here, which is the column next to it, that is our book balance. And the reason why I'm making this disclaimer here is because on June 30, the state does not give us our aid for our June aid until after the holiday in July. But they make us record it as an outstanding deposit on the books for June 30. So essentially our June 30 cash balances are inflated because it's money we don't have, but they make us report it as if we have it, okay? So the column to the far right is actually what we have. The one next to it is the inflated cash balances, okay? All the rest of them, basically, I just wanted to give you a trend of all of the June 30 cash balances before. And honestly, June 30 is not even our lowest point in time as far as cash goes. Our lowest point in time is always December because it's right before we get our property tax payment in January. So back in this time frame, June 30, 2009, even though we had this much cash, we had $34 million, as far part of that, most of that was still the Kids First, the bond construction. So we didn't have that much cash floating around then. We barely made December payroll back in those days because we had at that point like 1.5 months worth of cash. One payroll for us is $3.5 million. So when you're looking at cash balances, you're going, wow, they got $30 million. Well, 1 month's payroll is 3.5. Our average monthly expenditures are around $5 million. That includes with our AP, everything. So there's two different scenarios floating around out there as far as what they want to do with our cash balances, and some of them are to relieve the state with some of their financial distress that they have, which I think it's Senate Bill 111, I can't remember exactly the numbers, but what they want to do is just pick and choose. They want to pull fund balances out, and then they want to say you only get 50% of those balances. So what I've done there, all the yellow funds are statutorily fund balances that in the statute say they cannot take. So I've pulled those out. So that leaves 21 million on the books. Then I went one step further, and I call it green. I don't know, olive color funds. You can see them up here, but they're food service. Food service is all federal, pretty much, or parent-paid fees. So it really doesn't have, it's not state money at all. Special ed, right now the talk out there is that they're going to let us keep 1/3 of that money. Right now, down here, I've accounted for all of it, that if we were going to get to keep it. Then we have healthcare reserve. What that is we're self-funded. We have a self-funded health insurance plan. That money is what we pay our bills with, as far as people that go to the doctor, and we have to pay the doctors and the hospitals. That is the pot of money that we pay those bills with. So that would be disastrous for them to take that from us. And then this right here is, we're refinancing bond debt because we're able to get reduced rates, and that is our escrow. It's just a flow through of trying to clean those out. So technically, if they were to pull that, we might have a bill that comes in that we're still working on refinancing those bonds that will come due and we won't have the money to pay it. So once you pull that, then it comes down to 9.7 or 7.3, depending on what you're looking at. And since I used all of our fund balances, every last one of them, that's every fund we have up there, and every cash balance we have, I've used our entire expenditure, total expenditures for the year for 15-16. It's over 60 million, it's right at 60 million. And that part you can't see very well, but it's 60,310,432. You take that times 15%, that means we're allowed 9,046,000. You subtract that, then they're saying, then under my philosophy, which is probably not going to go very far, my philosophy, we would need to give back 701,000. But remember, we don't have that money on June 30. That's just a book balance, and so actually, we would actually be in the red. We have less than 15% on June 30, is what this scenario is saying. Dr. K wants to steal my mic.
But so it's really interesting to see what would happen and what they might end up letting us keep, not letting us keep when they propose the legislation or started talking about this. I haven't actually seen a piece of legislation. Have you seen the legislation yet? Does it have a bill number? 111. It doesn't mention the health pool. It doesn't mention a lot of things specifically that Lori has pulled out, and Dale Dennis at the State Department is trying to tell them, you can't do that. You can't take the food service money. That's federal money. You can't take that. You can't take the health pool money. That belongs to the employees because we're self-funded insurance. Well, it never occurred to them there were self-funded insurance things out there. But bottom line, if the state starts sweeping the school money, it's pretty scary because they're late with their payments now. This is what we're able to basically float the payroll and the bills with. And as Lori has said, when things have been really bad, we have been just nip and tuck having enough money from all the sources to be able to pay the bills and the payroll. We've actually gotten down to where the bank account was truly running dry. If the state's bank accounts are empty and they sweep funds from the school and the states still don't have money, I really am afraid that we will get to the point that we won't be able to pay the bills or make the payroll because the state won't be able to give us any money and we won't have any ourselves. So it's really pretty dire, and if this begins to move forward, it will be really imperative that legislators hear from people in the community saying, we understand why the schools have this money, and this is our money. A lot of this, like the capital outlay, the health pools, I mean, this stuff was paid in from people in our community. The state shouldn't be able to take that. Or to say, well, since you have it, you spend it, and we won't send you any money until you've spent that and it's gone. Because again, I think we've pretty much demonstrated why we need that money, just to be able to have some cash flow. Just like a family that, if you live paycheck to paycheck, you're gonna get in trouble and, you know, what do? You're gonna go hungry because you can't buy groceries, or you get evicted from your house because you can't pay the rent. The school district doesn't need to be in that kind of predicament. We need to budget our money a little bit better. And we do, but if the legislators have their way, at least some of them, that might not happen. I'll let you know like that.
Okay, no, good job.
Thank you. The other, just real quickly on the efficiency report, the other things that they've been saying is possibly a statewide health insurance pool, which right now that would cost our district money because we have a fairly good plan, health savings account, we're putting money into it, and the state plan would force us to pay more of the family premium, which is gonna, in my estimates, cost us double of what we're currently paying.
Put that in dollars for me, Lori.
3 million, we're paying 1.6 million now, so to double it, you're looking at 3.2 probably around there. And then they want us to collaboratively start buying in pools, which we used to do that way back when, and we have a warehouse, and we had to pay staff to keep track of what's in there, and then stuff would get old, and people would, not saying that any of the staff in this room did it, but they would hoard stuff, like they weren't gonna get any. But now what we're doing is just-in-time delivery, and so when you need it, you order it. And we have reduced our warehouse significantly, the work that we have to do, but if we have to go back to that, that's gonna cost us money, because we're gonna have to, it's gonna be a whole lot more work on the warehouse side, and Randy's shaking his head. And then the K-12 pool for liability and property, essentially, that's going to cause us to pick up the liability for every district in the state, which right now we're just responsible for our own buildings and our own liability. And, you know, that we don't have local support, and same way with your, if we were to buy our stuff out of the state pool, our local businesses, I believe, would be hurt in both incidences. Okay, what this graph, what I'm trying to get across to you guys tonight is that this one and the next one. This one is our enrollment. And the next slide is gonna put the enrollment into numbers. How does the money come into us?
And remember that right now, under the block grant formula, numbers don't matter. Your enrollment goes up as a school, your enrollment goes down. We're still getting the same money we got last year, and they're saying we'll get the same money next year. But sooner or later, they'll come up with a new formula, and numbers will matter again, and that's where this becomes
One
really
of the scenarios that we have to show to you tonight has it going back to the base state aid per pupil. So that's why I want to show this to you so that you'll understand where we're getting our numbers. So basically, it starts with 1213, and it shows a total enrollment of 7,847.1, and then now we're at 1516, and we're at 7,721.3. The reason why we're down just a little bit versus the block grant is because we no longer get to count virtual kids the way we used to count them, even in the block grant. They took that away from us. Off to the far right there, I broke out the weightings for FTE. You can see the 3,046.9 for 1213 and the 2,907.5 for 1516. We've lost weightings in there, and that is in our at-risk numbers. So if that, you can see how much of the weightings, it's in the red there in the graph, how much of that is part of our total enrollment numbers, and how it used to go back to the base data people, how important those weightings are. And the reason why the old formula broke those out is because they say in those different categories that it costs more to educate students that are bilingual or have at-risk needs or special ed needs. So basically, I think we're ready to flip the page here.
Did you mention the total loss if we get back to that?
Oh yeah, if we have to go back to the base state aid per pupil formula, we're going to lose $1.2 million. And with that, then this is, right now, what's got us a little bit concerned is they're thinking about changing the way that they fund at-risk kids. And so we'd have to be real mindful and watch how they decide they're going to do that. But right now, the at-risk K-12 dollars are for 15-16 is $5.9 million. It is 19.42% of our total budget are at-risk dollars. So it's a big chunk of our money. So anything the legislature does to fund the schools, we need to make sure that they have an avenue in there for us to fund our at-risk needs.
And one of the things that I've heard kicked around with the at-risk funding is instead of using free and reduced lunch numbers, which by the way, parents have to verify that. I mean, they audit it and the state comes in and they make parents produce proof that, that those are their numbers. And so it's not just like anybody can fill out a form and get free lunch, which is what some people think. Because there is a system of auditing and they check to make sure that we're not having high numbers of people who don't qualify. But one of the ways that's being proposed is, well, instead of that, we'll base it off of what your census numbers are, which to me is far less accurate because I think you've all filled out the census before. You can put down any number you want when you color in the bubble for your income. So if you overstate your income because you want to feel more affluent, no big deal. But the difference between the census poverty numbers for our school district and the free lunch numbers for our school district, it's about half as many. The poverty percentage by census, which of course takes into account people of all ages, is about 50% less than what we get when we do the free lunch count. So if they were to say, well, we'll still fund at-risk kids, but instead of free lunch, we'll use census numbers, look out. There was a study done a number of years ago that suggested that would be an easier way for schools to do it, but the caveat is that the legislators forget is that same study also said, but you'd have to significantly increase the amount of money per student or for that percentage. So they essentially said that might be an easier way to figure it, but then you need to increase the money that goes with it substantially. The legislators aren't necessarily paying attention to that part. It's the, oh, that's a smaller number, so let's do that. Let's lock that in. So we definitely need to pay attention to what that would be, because the at-risk money is what gets us things we need, like mental health services for our kids and social workers and counselors and the SRO at the high school, and a lot of those things that really are important to meeting the needs of our kids, that if those dollars substantially are reduced, it's going to be incredibly difficult for us to meet the needs of our high at-risk, really urban poverty students, because the level of poverty that we have in a number of our schools, it's like inner city urban poverty. We have great kids, but they have a lot of needs, and it does take resources for us to be able to meet their needs.
One more thing I wanted to point out, what this table will tell you is the general fund dollars is $30.6 million, but $19 million of it is unrestricted. It's the only part that can be used for core and that kind of thing. Everything else is a restricted, and we have to use it for certain things. And even though there's a block grant, you can spend it however you want. But however, when the auditors showed up, yeah, we had to show them that this amount of money was being spent in at-risk, this one was bilingual, so they still haven't moved off of that. Okay, so now what I've done is attempted to break down what I think, as a community, we're going to need to look at making for recommendations to the board. This part right here is if everything stays under the block grant. If the legislature says, okay, block grant stays in place, and the number 1 there in the blue Those are what I'm estimating our expenditures to increase next year. And I have a couple different scenarios of how the expenditures might increase depending on what happens. So that's why some of these scenarios have different estimated expenditures going forward. But this one, I'm estimating $792,113. Then we have textbook money. You saw in our cash balances, we have $3 million worth of textbook money. We're gonna dip into that a little bit. Dire times means it's time to start using some of the savings account more. If we do that, $200,000 for the next 5 years, we would have enough money to replace our textbooks for 5 years. Then after that, this district will run out of textbook money. So hopefully by the end of 5 years, the legislature will have this all straightened out and we can start getting some of the textbook money replaced. If they don't take it. If they take our cash balances and textbook, then we will have none. We'll have no. The green is basically the estimated expenditure. That's the lowest version of what I'm thinking our estimated fixed costs would be. And then we would not need to transfer into out of the textbook. And if you remember, and I didn't cover this in the first one, the Elementary Boundary Study Committee met all of last year. And so we have $350,000 worth of staff savings going forward in all of these scenarios. So that's where the $350,000 is coming from. So the first one under block with the higher expenditure estimates is a reduction of $242,000 that will need to balance the budget, or a positive 37.
And so just another way to say that, you can see that range of what might the expenses be, anywhere between, we need 313,000 up to almost 800,000 is kind of the range that we're saying might be what we need for increased expenses, cost to operate next year. And then depending on that, either, hey, things are pretty good, the work that we did last year together and are doing going forward with the restructuring at McCandless and taking a track out, hey, that would cover us. That would be our best case scenario. Or under this, if we stay under the block grant, then we could throw some textbook money in. We'd still have a little bit of shortfall that we'd need to cover, and make a few reductions. This scenario doesn't show kicking in a little bit of capital outlay, but that would be another option to cover that. So this is really our best case scenario is we get to stay with the block grant. Whatever the legislators do, they don't mess with the formula for the operation of schools. Now, if they come in and do something like they put that $54 million into the system, we pick up a little bit of capital outlay aid, and that would help us a little bit. And we didn't factor that in, but it's only about $120,000, so it's going to have some positive impact, but not really enough that we worried too much about it. So that would be the best case scenario. We stay under the block grant, and the legislators don't mess with the block grant formula this year. So talk amongst yourself. What questions do you have about what this scenario is basically saying would happen, what it means to us? Just take a minute to talk with your neighbors. What do you think this means? Do you have any questions for us about what this is?
Can you give examples of what the increases to the budget are?
I can give some general examples. I mean, things that happen that increase the budget would be, you know, we don't yet know, you know, what the utilities will be, but we do know that they are going up. There was a 4% increase to the West Star bills that hits the schools, so that's going up. We've got the storm sewer water tax that has increased, so we have those things. Also built in there is flexibility on what the board's going to decide to do with funding the salary schedule. We don't know what that number would be, so that'll hit in there somewhere. Other cost increases can be things like the transportation contract that we have with Durham. It has an automatic percentage that it goes up every year for inflation. And so there are a number of contracts like that around the district that have those kinds of inflationary prices built into them. And so that rolls all that kind of stuff up into our best guess of a range where that could fall. That answers that question? Any other questions? Thank you for that. Window of opportunity closing here. Okay, moving on to the next budget scenario. Under this one, Lori has put together that we go back to the base state aid formula. So they don't come up with a new formula, they just say, well, let's go back to the old formula. And keep in mind, the legislators could come up with some whole new formula. I think they're a little nuts if they try to do that because they still have the adequacy part of the lawsuit that's coming. And even the equity piece of the lawsuit, I didn't say this, but the court said you can't impact adequacy to fix this problem. So the $54 million that they get, they can't rob out of school operations to get the $54 million. At least they're not supposed to. It doesn't mean that they won't try that, but they weren't supposed to. So if they're smart, they'll leave this alone at least for another year, which hopefully gets us through the court ruling on adequacy that says you have to give more money to schools, which will help us cushion this drop of enrollment that we have had. But here's the estimated return to the old formula. And Lori will walk through that.
So essentially what's different between these two is your difference in what we think our costs are going to be for increased expenditures and estimated loss of enrollment. So you saw from 14, 15, 15, 16, what we think our enrollment's going to be for 16, 17. We think it's going to, well, I know it's a loss of 156.7. It's because we've already had our enrollment audit. And who knows what they're going to do with the space state aid per pupil number. Right now, that's what it was when we left the block grant formula. Or when we went to the block grant formula, that's what it was. When we left space state aid, that's what it was. So if you take that times that, it's $603. At $603,608. Then remember we had all those weightings that I talked about? When those get reduced, then that also affects us. So I'm estimating that we're going to lose 72 FTE, same base state aid. So you take that number plus the $126,468, you get $730,076 loss of budget authority. Then the next line is the LOB levy due to enrollment drop. Not for sure what will happen with this. When you lose, right now the LOB is figured on your general fund budget and it's a percent of that. So when that budget authority drops, what percent of when you have a percent of a lower number, you're going to have a lower number, right? So I don't know what they'll do with that, but this is a guess. I think we could lose around $200,000 of LOB authority as well, as that drops. So with that, with the estimated expenditures, we're going to kick in the textbook transfer, we're going to use it again, and then our savings from our boundary changes, we're looking at a $1.1 million shortfall, budget shortfall, if this scenario should happen to go into play.
Best case scenario is if the expenses are lower, thank you. If the expenses are lower, the lowest that we think we could get the expenses down to would still be about a $700,000 shortfall. Again, this is without putting any additional tax increases into play and stealing some money from our textbook fund. But I think you can guess that cutting either of those numbers, be it $700,000 or basically $1.2 million from our budget, that's an awful lot of staff. And a long time ago, we've nickeled and dimed supplies and things. We could probably cut a little bit more if we had to. But you're down to the point that you are talking about staff, because that's over 80% of our budget is salaries, and that's where you have to go to find this kind of money, and that means kids aren't getting services of some kind. So pretty significant if,
Sorry,
that if that would happen. Again, I'm really hoping that our legislators are smarter than that and they stay away from it, but it also begins to give us an idea of the kind of issues that we could be facing a year from now if we go back to something where numbers do begin to count. Okay, so here is a little different scenario that basically looking at the scenarios, but we've still got some money left in capital outlay that we can raise. And Lori, you want to talk about that? Maybe remind them that we now can spend capital outlay for some things.
Was it 2 years ago? They changed the rules on how you could spend capital outlay. What you had to do is reauthorize your capital outlay levy, which we did. And so we have an 8 mil continuous and permanent capital outlay levy. So right now we are levying 4 mils. So we still have additional 4 mils revenue authority left in the capital outlay. So these are my attempts to, and these can be anywhere in between, but this is what I chose to throw out here to show you tonight. Basically, our shortfall in our enrollment, if this would be if we stay with the block. Excuse me. So this is what our total estimated increased cost per budget. This would be the high estimate. We could increase capital outlay and move custodial maintenance salaries out of the general fund and move them into capital outlay and increase the capital outlay mills to cover that. That would be $242,113 to get this to balance to zero. So this, less this, less this, less this is zero. Right now, remember what I said? 1 mil in capital outlay is worth $211,000. So you divide that into what we need, which is 243. So it's going to be about a 1.144 mil increase to our taxpayers. Okay, so scenario 6, this is if we're, if they go back to the base state aid per pupil. So we're back to the same deductions. This is the higher expenditure estimate. This is moving custodial maintenance salaries, all 4 mills, so we could capture about $846,188, and we're still short $326,000 of balancing the budget, and that's increasing to all 4 mills. Capital. Scenario 7 is basically base state aid per pupil with the lower expenditure estimate. And so basically that would be a 3.28 mil cost if, you know, to get it to go to zero, to balance. So with that, you're going, oh my gosh, what does that mean to our taxpayers if we were to increase our capital outlay? Well, this is a table on what it costs taxpayers to increase 1 mil. So right now, this is our mill levy for 15-16, actual mill levy. If we were going to increase capital outlay by 1 mil, see the increase right here? On a $100,000 home, and what they do is it's always an assessed rate of 11.5%. So then that takes 11,500 and you multiply it times, you have to move your decimal over for each of these different mills to get what you pay for each one of these little different levies. Right now there's a general fund residential exemption of $20,000, so 11.5% of that is $46, so you get to back that off. So this is what taxpayers paid in our district on a $100,000 home. 15-16. 1 mil levy to increase it would be $608.97 or $11.49. And believe me, Excel flipping drives me crazy. This cell right here has $11.50, but because of how it, I don't know, it's crazy. This ended up being $11.49, but it's just, Excel has a little bit of a problem sometimes when it comes to rounding. But anyway, that is, it costs $11.50 per mil to taxpayers on a $100,000 home.
wanted to make tonight is where we could end up needing to be with our budget this year right now is truly anybody's guess. It could be everywhere from, hey, you know, we're in pretty good shape with the $350,000 that we've been able to save from the rebounding and removing the track from the canvas. Hey, our work is done. And we would feel pretty darn good about the work that we have accomplished. All the way up to the legislators come in, they go back to some sort of a numbers-based formula instead of staying with the block grant. And that's just our best guess, because they could try to come up with some new formula that isn't what we base this on. It could be something entirely different. But the only thing that we can estimate from is at least the old formula is something that we kind of know what those numbers look like. So it could be anywhere from our work is done, hooray, to kind of the middle of the road, which is, okay, we need to come up with about $700,000, to, oh good heavens, the sky is falling, we need to come up with almost $1.2 million. On any of those scenarios except the first one, then we have to decide as a committee, what do we want to recommend to our Board of Education that they do in terms of what are cuts that we make versus what revenue do we raise? Because as Lori showed you, we still have 4 mills that we can raise through capital outlay. In the worst case scenario, we might need that. In one of the scenarios that's not as bad, do we want to look for a balance of we still have some cuts that, you know, we can suck it up and make to keep the tax increase not as bad? Because knowing once we do that last of those 4 mills on capital outlay, unless the law changes, we're done. There's no more revenue that we can raise as a district. And so, you know, then a year from now, if we have to find more money, the only source that we have is to make cuts and make the cuts all at once. So kind of depends on the philosophy that you want to have. If you think suddenly things are going to get great, maybe you approach it from one way. If you think that we still have some tough years ahead of us as a state, you know, you may want to ease into it and not spend all that revenue at once. So again, I want you to turn to your neighbors, talk for just a bit about what you've heard tonight, and do you have any questions that you want answered before we get into the next part of our conversation, which is, how do you think we should balance it? Just from a philosophical standpoint, is it all cuts? Is it all tax increase? Is it kind of a balance in the middle? That's the conversation we're going to have this evening. But before we go there, just talk to your neighbors. What questions are still running through your mind right now? Okay, I'll bring you back together for, again, any questions that you have before we move on and begin to talk more philosophically how we approach this dilemma? Any questions?
Basically, the numbers, Dr. Kiblinger and Lori, that we're using for our high, middle, and our low are based on worst case scenario. That's the base dating for people's numbers, correct?
Well, they range between, let me go back to that, they range between, the worst case scenario, that really high number would be the highest level of expenses.
It's this one right here.
And so the highest level of expenses, and the block grant goes away, so we go back to the old formula or something similar where we're going to maybe lose at-risk funding, or maybe we lose enrollment, or a combination of that. So it's the stable funding, block grant out the window with high expenses. The hey, things are pretty good and we don't have to cut anything scenario that's back on this side. The low number is based on the lower expenses and not raising any revenue, but funding stays stable. So we stay under the block grant. So it's kind of all the different ideas rolled up into one. The best to the worst.
Basically, it's probably going to be anywhere in between here and here of where it'll fall.
What I hope happens is if our legislators are smart, and that's a big if sometimes, as a collective body. Again, I would find the $54 million to fund the equity part of the lawsuit, not try to do anything with the funding formula, knowing that the other part of the Supreme Court ruling is coming. And that would put us more toward this middle to low end of the spectrum, which is manageable, especially when we look at the fact that we could put some capital outlay money toward this. We can raise some revenue. That's really where I hope that we will end up, but you never know. So we at least have to put the dire situation out there to talk about, because if we don't and it happens and we've done nothing to plan and prepare for it, and it comes at the last minute, we'll really be between a rock and a hard place, because we will not have planned. So it's kind of that delicate balance of, you don't really want to panic, but we also don't want to be ostriches and stick our head in the sand and just say, well, I'm just sure that everything will work out. So that's what really makes our current work this year very challenging and very frustrating, because it is likely that we will be quite a ways into the end of the school year, or even into June, before we will absolutely know. And it's also frustrating because we can't make certain staff cuts if we need to, just at the last minute. Teachers have contracts and they're moving forward. We, however, are in a lot better shape than a lot of the schools around us. Many schools are saying it's a hiring freeze. We're not going to hire any new teachers. A teacher quits, too bad, we won't replace them. Administrator quits, too bad, we won't replace them. And they'll just wait and see and sit there with no staff hired, because they don't have any ability to go up with their revenue. If we were sitting here with no cash balances and nothing left that we could go up in our capital outlay, we would be in that kind of situation too. But we're not, so it could be worse. So if you say, oh my goodness, this is bad, we've really got it pretty darn good. So we've really planned pretty well as a community and a school district, because there are many, many schools that are just, we can't hire anybody, because if the doom and gloom happens, they have nowhere to go, which may give us an advantage in hiring some really quality teachers this year. So like I said, there's a bright side to all of this. Other questions? Seeing none, as I said, we don't really know where we stand, but as I said, we want to discuss the worst case scenario as a possibility, just so we can plan for it. My philosophy always is, if you've planned for the worst and then hope for and expect the best, you'll come out okay. So don't panic, but in broad terms, we need to discuss those numbers and how bad it could be. What I want us to do, we've got about 15 minutes left, and we won't come up with any hard and fast answers tonight, but as I said, this is more philosophy. I want you to talk about these things, and I want you to just, again, get in little groups of like 3 to 4 people, whatever is convenient to get into, and talk about what do you think is appropriate as far as the ratio of cuts to make to increases in revenue that should be appropriate. If we need to come up with some more money, is it 50-50? Part of it comes from tax increases, part of it comes from cuts. Is it, hey, 100% make cuts? Is it, 100% make tax increases? That's what it should be. And talk about, how much revenue do you really think we could reasonably raise to avoid the cuts? What's the tolerance in our community? What kind of level of support do you think our community would have to do that? If cuts were necessary, are there any non-personnel reductions that you can think of that wouldn't hurt the district in the long term? Maybe you have some ideas. And if personnel were reduced, how many positions, would be needed in your budget area? And that's probably a little beyond what we want to talk about tonight. But just to kind of start thinking about, okay, what's that ratio of how much taxes do we raise? How many cuts do we make as a whole? What do you think philosophically that should look like? And then really kind of start to kick around, is there anything out there that you see that you would want to put on the table and ask, well, what about that? That's a non-personnel day. Do we need that? Could we get rid of that? What would that be? What would that look like? So just take a little bit of time. We'll take about 10 minutes to have that conversation, then I'll pull you back together and just ask you, what did you talk about? What did you come up with? Where do you think, where does your group think we should be in terms of that ratio of cuts versus raising revenue through some higher capital outlay mill levies? So have a bit of conversation. You've got 10 minutes to just kind of beat those ideas up, and then we'll just take a quick poll to see where you are. Well, our next meeting is scheduled for April the 4th at 6 o'clock, and I think our plan for that meeting would be to begin brainstorming where do we go from here? To start looking at any suggestions that we would have for if we have a balance of some cuts and some revenue increases, because everybody said most likely some form of reduction regardless of your ratio, where might those be? So, be thinking. Administration may have some ideas for you as well to talk about when we meet on April the 4th. And so with that, have a good rest of your evening. What's left of it.